everybody sells them that like it's the same as saying, oh, well, we have a $25 podcast USB mic and you'll be awesome with it. And it's the same thing of like, oh, watch my video and you can learn how to mix. And it's like, here's this little mixing trick. And you don't actually have to learn how audio works, but you just have to push this button or do this technique and everything will sound amazing. And people find out pretty quickly that that doesn't work.
You're listening to the GWNL-Podcast. Guys with no lives talking about audio.
Hello and welcome to episode 15. My name is Joe. We have
Ben.
And Bryant.
With an extremely long delay. It's almost like they're using a delay unit. It took so long. Was that 500 milliseconds? No, this is episode 15 with Guys with No Lives, GWNL-Podcast, because we have nothing else to do with our lives but talk about audio, because all of our wives have left us, our dogs too. I don't have a wife in here, no dog, you can see. This week, we're talking about an interesting topic that's a little bit more wordy than usual. We're talking about how maybe a copy of Ableton and a Mac is a little bit more important than a $500,000 studio in the 80s. All right, let's start with this.
More
Bryant, what's your take on that?
Powerful.
Ben, I didn't ask for your opinion. Bryant, please talk. Thank you.
I mean, even if you go like further back than just the 80s, if you think about it, the Beatles would have killed to have like a Scarlett.
Dude, and how many
mic.
tracks?
Yeah, like the track count that we have,
It's crazy.
The Beatles would have like really killed for something like that. So that's pretty wild that, we have such high quality gear at such low prices that we can, that's like so accessible today.
Like I have a coworker at work who's a drummer, and he was like interested, and he bought like a cheap 8-channel preamp, like interface, like a Behringer interface, and he bought that, and he's got like a whole little cheap mic, Samson mics with this Behringer interface, and now he's gonna go and he's gonna record his drums. And I pointed out to him, like, yo, it's relatively cheap, you might want something a little nicer. And he says, I'm just experimenting. I'm not stressing myself out about this right now. And I was like, cool. I just don't want you to like think that this is going to be like necessarily like top end quality stuff. Just don't, like set your expectations where it's going to be. And you know what? He's now getting into mixing. And I even pointed out, I'm like, hey, you should check out this DAW, or you should check out this thing. They're a lot more affordable for you. And seeing as you don't want to, like, he doesn't want to put in like a ton of money. And so he's already spent all that money on his drum set. So for him, yeah, he's getting into this. He asked me for a bunch of like multi-tracks, so I sent him to a couple websites that I use for like pulling out multi-tracks when I'm not recording stuff, and it's cool. He doesn't do this as a stage. He's doing this for fun, and he can afford it for basically under $500 to record his drum set.
Yeah,
and
it's pretty
really
crazy.
It is really cool because, I mean, when I was first getting into stuff, it was right as like the home studio revolution was kind of happening. Back around the turn of the century, as I always like to say, back before the aughts began. But yeah,
It's horrible.
My old man voice.
Back in my day.
We should all talk like old men for a podcast.
But yeah, it was interesting because there were a lot of people, like the home studios before that, like in the 90s, and there were still people that were still with those setups and stuff. He's got his 58.
Yeah, of course I got
goodness,
it. Keep
Joe.
talking, man.
If you actually flip that over, maybe we can like believe that it's not. There we go.
You don't like my mic clip?
Yeah, the mic clip pointing up. But anyways, like they had like 8-track, half-inch, which was like the less professional, like the home studio thing, and then you had the multi-track cassette decks, which actually are coming back, which is kind of crazy, coming back into style. But like the level of quality and stuff, and how expensive those things were. I mean, comparing that to like a Scarlett and a small 2-channel interface and a simple computer is just insane. Like what we can do at our fingertips. And there's so many people, like even then, that had to spend thousands of dollars to have a setup that they could just experiment with and I want to record my drums and then listen back and assess what I'm doing, and you had to spend thousands of dollars to do that before. And now that guy can probably spend like $1,000 or $2,000 and be able to do that same thing.
With the right skill. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Or
then
even,
let me
or
ask
even
you.
less than that too.
Yeah.
So I have an interesting question, and maybe this is not a good question. I don't know. I was thinking about it. Do you think this has been beneficial, or do you think there are benefits and drawbacks? I think there are, but like, what would you say is beneficial about this? What would you say are some drawbacks with like this change?
I mean, I think the biggest benefit I've seen is the customization of studios, because before it was like if you had a studio, it was a 24-track studio and you had a big tape machine, and yeah, even when I was starting to get into it, there were a lot of ADAT studios, which would be that was a cheaper way of doing multi-track recording, because an ADAT machine was $3,000 for 8 channels. So for $9,000 you could get a 24-track studio or 24-track machine, as opposed to $100,000 for a 24-track tape machine. So it was like, that was way more affordable. But even then, you think about that, $9,000 just for your 24-track machine. I mean, in and out. But like back in that day, if you wanted to just do a simple voice recording of something, you still had to go into this $200 an hour studio that's all equipped with 24 channels and all these really fancy mics and a big space to record a full band or full orchestra, just to sit there on a mic and talk or record some kind of voiceover. And yeah, there were some voiceover studios, but those were all like, ADR studios in LA and stuff like that. There weren't like, like you couldn't easily find a voiceover studio. But, now we can be so much more scalable, where you can have a simple setup that just has one channel of really quality audio, and you can go in and you can do voiceovers, or you can do simple stuff. And even I've worked with a lot of voiceover studios, voiceover actors, that it kind of turned to the point where they expected everybody to have their own setup at home. So, for voiceover actors, they'd call them in the studio, and you get hired for the job as the actor, and then they'd hire out the studio too. And so they're paying the actor and they're paying the studio. And then as voiceover actors started to get home setups with the, DAWs, they were like, hey, guess what? I can do this for you, and I can record it myself and do the voiceover. And now it's saving them money. The voice actor's getting paid a little bit more money because they have the studio too. But then it got to the point where now nobody wants to hire out a studio to pay for the voice actor. They just want to pay the voice actor and they'll record it themselves. And that's doable. I mean, and some of them got really nice setups, but nice signal chain, but it's only one channel. So, and then, treat their room and stuff. But
well, and then kind of part of that too, I think that, with the kind of invention of the DAW and stuff, and how affordable different DAWs are, you can get like a fully fledged, decent DAW for $200. Logic comes with a lot of stuff. I'm not a terribly like big Logic user, but Logic is a fully equipped DAW that comes with so much stuff, and it allows people to be able to kind of like break into the audio world. Like one of my friends, he edits podcasts full time. He does that. He does most of his work out of Logic, and it's crazy that basically his startup fees, like his costs, were his computer and his DAW, and that's all that he needed to get started.
I would go one step further and say GarageBand. Like,
yeah,
it's really good for free. I don't know how else to say it, but yeah.
Yes, I think that this whole like home recording revolution thing that happened, because it's already happened. We're past that now. Yeah. We're kind of in the home recording age now, and of course, like I think that there's definitely still valid uses for like huge studios. And a lot of like A-listers, they're only going to be using, those high quality studios, but the barrier of entry has lowered significantly, because of the cost of things and the accessibility of equipment and software, which has bred a lot of, innovation in both worlds, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
I think one of the drawbacks that kind of has happened from this whole thing is there's a lot of information, which means there's a lot you have to sort through, and everyone's trying to sell you on their one way to do things or their one methodology. And I think that's a big battle. I would also add one more thing, and this is kind of one of the talking points that we brought up, and it's kind of the last one, but whatever, I don't care. There's, because of that, and because there's a big breakdown between those things, you have like some industry professionals, and I've run into this, that kind of, they, you know what I'm saying? Like it's one of those things where, like, a good example is in live sound. Like, they don't care that you have a degree. They actually are looking more at your work experience. That at least from most of the people I've interacted with, they're not really like, I had bosses telling me, don't bring up your college education. Though now it's much more common. I would say that the college education is getting better and better and better. But I tend to also kind of fall into that camp to agree with my bosses, because there's a lot of people that go to these colleges, they learn things, or really they're given a degree, but like honestly, they might not have the hands-on experience. I've had experiences with other people of dubious educational qualities. And so, in the live sound realm, experience is more important, and it's a little different than with studio stuff, but even then I think there's a huge volume of information, and it's like, how do you decide this is good or this isn't good? I mean, you kind of have to know some things first before you can really do that, and even then, like, it's easy to get taken in by snake oil, and that's I think one of the big like drawbacks to this. It's great that it's available. It's also kind of difficult because there's a lot of weird ideas out there, and you got to watch out for that. Heck, I fall into those sometimes. So
yeah, that's interesting because, I mean, back in the day, it was a really narrow entrance. You know, there was the gatekeepers there. I mean, really, the way to get into the studio world was you had to, you know, beg.
You were their intern. You would go get their coffee.
Unpaid intern.
Yeah. Sorry.
You cleaned up vomit and you got coffee, and you did all the gross jobs that they didn't want to do. Clean the bathrooms and score drugs for people, and you know, all these things. And that was kind of, and there's so many stories of that kind of thing. And then you had these same people, and literally the stories would go, that's what they were doing. And then they would be a fly on the wall in the background and kind of learn how things were going. And then one day the engineer would get in a car accident on the way, you know, or be sick or something like that, last second thing. And then that's when they get to step in and take over. And then the people in the session are like, hey, they did a good job. I liked them. Are they going to be there the next time I come in? You know, and that's what, like, person after person, like all these famous people, a lot of them are now, it's the age of that they're all like passing away in the last couple of years a lot, but that was how they all made it in. And so 20 years ago, when I was getting out of college and trying to do stuff, it was weird because they weren't really liking the college degree stuff much. And so they were still like, okay, well, I went through all this crap, and so you have to go through it too, you know? So you have to come in and work for free and clean toilets and get coffee and stuff. And then maybe you'll get a chance to make it. And then a couple years, like 10 years later, it became, oh, these degrees are helpful and it's nice for people to have information. But then it was like, okay, well, you need to know all this stuff, and you still have to come in on the ground floor. We're not going to pay you spent all this money on education, but we're still going to bring you in on unpaid intern status and make you get coffee and do all the grunt work until your break happens. Oof. And it seems like it's progressed a little bit past that now, but it's still to the point where they expect you to kind of, before you go on the ground floor, they expect you to know a lot more than it ever was before.
And still do nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I don't know. It's kind of weird in the live world, and I'm a little detached from that because of my current job, but I know this. If you can wind cable, honestly, any live company will at least take you on as a stagehand, and that right there will get your foot in the door with a lot of live companies.
That's why
wind cable.
Everybody.
Well, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I did, I had to teach a bunch of people how to wind cables, because a lot of the people, they're just like, oh yeah, we need bodies for this gig. So
yeah,
come here and is like, cool, I haven't seen you on a gig before. Do you know how to wrap a cable? And they're like, yeah, I just like put it around my arm, right? Like, no. Okay, we're teaching you how to wrap a cable right now. Who else does not know how to wrap a cable? It's like I'm not even like high up in these companies. I'm still kind of like a nobody in these companies. But it's like, yeah, come on, guys, let's it's not that hard to wrap a cable, but yeah.
It's true.
If you're wondering what level 0 of audio is, it's wrapping a cable.
Yeah.
That's level 0. That's where you start.
And you know what? I don't know if I've said it on here before, but one of my favorite stories is a student I had who, I taught him how to wrap a cable in classes and stuff. And he, we set stuff up and I made sure he knew how to wrap cables. And he went out to LA and he got a job with this, was one of the bigger live sound national, like live sound AV companies. It does stuff in hotels and everything. And he went in for the interview and they asked him to wrap a cable. And as soon as he started wrapping it properly, they hired him. They didn't even let him finish wrapping the cable. They just hired him on the spot. So he had to send me a message. He's like, thank you for teaching me how to wrap a cable because I just got a job because of it. And so now I like teach, like every music major in our program has to go through my classes, and wrapping cable is huge. So every music major has to learn to do that because it is a huge skill. And it is base 0 of audio professional skills is wrapping a cable properly.
So here's a question, and this is kind of regarding this. So we've talked about a little bit of gatekeeping that has kind of existed in the audio industry that we've all known about. And I would still say that there is still some of that. I'd say more so in like live sound in some regards, and I guess in both industries. But do you think that with easier access to audio, do you think that people are more skilled with audio, or do you think it really hasn't made a difference because the people who are interested are still interested and the people who aren't interested aren't? Like do you think there's made a difference in like how educated people are going to be in audio, or like how like more experienced? And we're not talking about somebody who doesn't want to learn audio. We're talking about somebody who like, I got a Scarlett 2i2 and I want to start getting into this. Do you think they're more educated or less? Ready to go.
I think that there ends up being people that do figure it out. Like, because, you're really graded on your product. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people out there that without a terribly huge amount of education or on-the-job training can actually come up with a really good product. Like I think I might have mentioned this guy before. I had a student who is very successful, and I knew he was going to be successful. He was already flying up to New York and working up there while he was in school. And he came in and he didn't really know how to mix. And I was doing like one-on-one training with him, teaching him how to mix. But his mixes were actually really good sounding. But like I'd look at his plugins and it was just like he had no idea what he was doing with all the knobs. But he had a really good ear and a really good, feel for stuff. And so once I was able to teach him what the knobs are doing, then he could like, figure it out much quicker. But he already had that good, and his mixes were like better than people that had learned a bunch of mixing and had done training for, a while. So I think that's a lot of people can figure it out. And that's the argument that people make of not going to school is like, oh, well, if you're talented at this, you can figure this out quick without anybody training you. And I think it is all about the results. So, about that.
Bryant, do you think that with the lower barrier to entry to get into audio, do you think that has made people more experienced pound for pound, like starting out, or less experienced? Like, do you think that experience has made a difference in the quality of what their outcome is as they're mixing and learning?
I think that because of the accessibility, it's allowed more people that wouldn't have had the opportunity to dive into that, to be able to break into that and then, build that experience. But of course, if you think of it as like a percentage, because of the accessibility, there's a lot of people that have absolutely no idea what they're even doing with audio. Like I literally just talked to somebody like 2 weeks ago that called in because she has a Neumann TLM 102 and she doesn't like that she has to use phantom power with it. And so she wanted to buy a new mic that doesn't need phantom power, but sounds the same. She was like, I love the sound of it, but I hate that I have to use phantom power because I don't remember if I have phantom power on or not. I don't even know what phantom power is. And I'm like, what do you do?
I got this SM58 right here. I'll trade.
Yeah. She was like, I'm a voice actor. I need something that sounds good. So I ended up selling her, Neumann has, I originally tried to sell her like an SM7B, and she's like, no, I don't want that. I don't like the look of it. Cause I also do some podcast
that
stuff.
Makes it sound
and
worse.
It's going to be in, the shot and stuff. And I want it to look good too. And so I went through a bunch of options, ended up going up higher and higher in price. And next thing I know, I'm like, well, there's this Neumann broadcast mic that's like $800. Do you want that? And she's like, yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly what I want. And I was like, this lady has no idea what she wants, and she's totally going to return this, and I'm going to regret this. Because when I take a return, I don't just eat the return, but usually I eat more than just the commission that I lost on that. Usually it takes out more than just, however much commission. And so I was like, shoot, in 3 weeks, she's going to return this. Anyway, she calls me a week later, and I missed her call. And I was like, oh crap, she's totally going to return this. Anyway, I got her on the line, and she's like, no, I just wanted to call you and say thanks for it. It sounds great. And I was like, oh, thank heavens. But this is a lady that has no idea what she's talking about. And then I have people that call in all the time like, yeah, I want to sound like Joe Rogan on my podcast. And it's like, okay, yeah.
Get Joe Rogan to come to your podcast.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, how much do you how much have you set aside for this investment? And they're like, yeah, what can I get with $25?
$25.
You're like, yeah, you're not going to sound like Joe Rogan for $25. To sound like Joe Rogan, you're going to have to put in about $1,000 between everything. And some people just don't understand that. And then on the live sound side of things, I recently had a quote sent out, and when I was talking to the lady, getting an idea of kind of the stuff that she was doing, it was mainly for some women's voter rights organization. It was a really, really cool thing. And I was like, okay, yeah, I think that I can work with this. What's the kind of budget that you're working with? And she's like, well, I think we could do it for $1,000. And I was like, you want 4 channels of wireless mics and you want speakers. And I just straight up said, yeah, for $1,000, you're probably looking at just the speakers for what you're trying to do. And she's like, okay, well, put together a quote. And it ended up being almost $2,500 for this. And I was like, yeah, they're not going to go for this. But they ended up deciding that, they want to make that investment. So waiting for that to go through. But people I think the biggest thing is that people don't understand, the cost associated with certain things, especially in the live sound side of things and events. People think, oh yeah, I want a wireless mic. And then they see this, this wireless equipment that operates on the 2.4 gigahertz, spectrum. And they're like, oh, I need 8 wireless mics. And it's like, yeah, you're going to be lucky if you can get 3 to work in that band.
In 2.4?
Yeah.
So this brings up a good point when, with what we're talking about the value of, the value of equipment, the cost of getting into things. But I think it's also the value of education and learning about things. The same concept of, oh yeah, I can only pay $25 to get a high quality, podcast mic and setup, is the same concept of, well, I'll just watch a couple YouTube videos and I'll be able to be this amazing mix engineer. And I think it's the same concept. And then everybody sells them that it's the same as saying, oh, well, we have a $25 podcast USB mic and you'll be awesome with it. And it's the same thing of oh, watch my video and you can learn how to mix. And it's here's this little mixing trick. And you don't actually have to learn how audio works, but you just have to push this button or do this technique and everything will sound amazing. So I think, and people find out pretty quickly that doesn't work, but they're really the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that the whole price thing comes from a lack of education and kind of a lack of reference and not really knowing kind of the market on things. I mean, just like I said, like we've kind of, there's been this overlying theme throughout all of our episodes where it's like, yeah, you don't necessarily need to have the most expensive gear in order to get into audio. At the same time, if you're looking at getting, you know, a $25 mic that does everything, you know, it's definitely not going to sound similar to, you know, it's not, you're not going to get Joe Rogan podcast quality out of a $25, you know, USB mic.
And I think we've kind of come into the same thing. A lot of times we've had the attitude of preaching, it's the ear, not the gear, right? We bring that up a lot, and I think that that's true. But I think you reach a point where there is a certain threshold in cost that you need to spend to really hit that prosumer, where it's good enough that you can probably get away with passing it off as professional work. But part of that is experience. Part of that is actually like doing the thing and like learning the thing and learning what those knobs and buttons do, and then listening for that and learning to hear that and like recognizing that. And that's not something that happens overnight, you know, like I'm still learning things about compression, and I've been working, that's been my main focus for the last 2 years. So there's that. But there's also that idea that you can learn a lot without a lot of money input money. And that's what we're kind of getting at here. That's what we get at with those things.
I think that kind of leads into kind of the 80-20 rule, which is basically where, you know, 80% of the work, well, it takes about 20% of your time to do 80% of the work. And that last 20% of the work is going to take 80% of the time to do that. And it's kind of the same thing with audio gear where, you know, a Scarlett and like a Rode NT1A, that can get you 80% of the way there. And it's kind of that last 20% of quality that takes up 80% of, you know, your
of the price.
Funds of the price. Yeah.
Yeah. If you just think about it, if you spend $200 on an interface and a mic, that'll get you 80% of the way there. But
and we're not including the cost of a computer because everyone has computers.
Yeah, but if we just say that, but if you want to get that other 90 or 100% of the way there, it's going to cost you at least another $800 to get to substantially get better than that. And I think our point is not to discourage everybody, to point out the benefits of the inexpensive systems and the accessibility so that you can get into this. And just like Joe's friend with the drums, you know, you can get into it just to be like, I want to just be able to have a sketch pad where I can record some ideas and listen back and hear what it sounds like and play with, you know, and just have it be a hobby thing. But it does often turn into more than that, where people are like, oh, now I've gotten out of the babble phase. So they're, you know, like babies babble, where they just like make noise because they can hear themselves making noise. That's an official phase that we go through in many different creative things. And we do it in audio and music where we're like, hey, I can actually record something and it plays back and it sounds amazing, you know, even though the quality might not be, but it sounds amazing to us because it's playing back. It's like, I was just saying that in the mic and now it's coming back to me from speakers. This is amazing. Yeah. But once we get through those, like out of that babble phase, then it's like, oh, I want to make that sound better. And the real thing is where do we go to figure out how to make it sound better, you know, to get better equipment, to get better training, to learn how to take it to the next level. Because some people are fine just hanging out in that low entry level.
Let's start with Ben. You give us your last thoughts.
Well, I just finished talking.
Well, fine,
right
Brian, give us your last thoughts.
You know, if you're wanting to get into audio and you don't know what to do or what to like get, or if you're like worried about your budget, you're like, oh, I don't have as much money as like, you know, I don't have enough money to put down and like create my studio. It's like, you know, just get like some entry level stuff, if you know, perfectly fine to start out with that and start learning the basics, start experimenting. That's kind of like the biggest thing. Just use the gear, experiment, learn. You're going to learn a lot through trial and error.
I guess I'm speaking more to like live sound guys in some regards. in the live sound world, you will probably battle more in the way of gatekeeping and industry clientele that way, especially if you start getting into like larger events with major clients and stuff like that, which is very possible with major production companies, which is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. But you have to realize a lot of these guys are industry veterans with like 20 and 30 years of experience. So when they look at you, everything you know, like I had a friend of mine say this to me. I laugh because it's true. He's like, I have learned more about audio and forgotten it in a drug-addled haze than you ever have learned. And I had like at that point I had 3 years experience, and he's not wrong. But he's like, basically, you know, he'd been 20 years, I think, working. And there are a lot of guys out there like that. And it's hard to not get discouraged. And I know from my own personal hat, like, it's hard when you see people running like fancy rigs, or you hear, you know, somebody's got their like fancy RTA mic set up with like wireless RTA mics that they're connected into their computer, and they're running all kinds of stuff. And then they're running like, you know, massive line arrays in the millions of dollars range. And like, you're just like trying to make it with your like DJ rig on the weekends. And you're just like, how am I ever going to make a career out of this? Or even if you're working in a crew with like a production team, or you're just a stagehand on the side of the road. Not side of the road, but on the side stage and stuff. Yeah, because you're obviously on the side of the road.
Will work for
Can I get a ride? No, there is always going to be some of that negative attitude. You're always going to have to kind of fight jaded, bitter people who've had rough times in the career. I am one of those people to some extent, and I try not to be. I'm not really good at it. And I don't even have that long of experience. I bet my coworkers are sitting there laughing at me like, you know, talking like he knows this stuff. It was hard. It was hard because I had to go to work every day for a year of my life and deal with all kinds of stuff. It's not easy being in audio, let alone like live sound. I know studio is stressful in different ways. I've never really had to deal with it that way. I mean, sort of, but I don't think that counts.
I think it is tougher,
It's
especially
hard.
with the gatekeepers, like you said.
Yeah.
Like I was saying earlier, like with production and audio and studio, you have a product that you can present to show how good you're doing, and it's a lot harder to do that in live sound. And so people are like judging you, like, "Oh, I don't know you. You don't have."
Yeah,
the
they're gonna test you.
experience."
They're gonna
Yeah.
push you. They're gonna be like, "Oh,
Yeah.
how would you set this compressor, huh, new guy?" You know, like stuff like that, and they'll mess with you. And there's a lot of stuff like that because I get it, because when you're in live, it's one of those situations where you don't really have the time to sit there and hope that this person who says they know what they know knows what they know. You don't have that time. If for some unforsaken reason you have your wireless microphones go down in the middle of a concert, you don't want some kid who said, "Oh yeah, I think I read about like how RF works in wireless microphones once." You don't want that kid troubleshooting your wireless microphones, okay? Because he's not going to know jack squat. Likewise, they're kind of in an industry where that's not like you don't have those kinds of luxuries. So that's part of the reason why, and you kind of have to just work past it. Not everybody's that jaded. Not everybody's bitter. I had a lot of upbringing with a lot of bitter sound guys. Jaded, tired individuals that were sick and tired of the industry. And again, I had a boss even say that. I said this to Ben just before this. I was like, he said to me, nobody chooses audio. They find themselves there after a gig. And that really kind of hurt me, not because everyone that I worked with was jaded and bitter, but because it was like, I came in and I just wanted to know this stuff. I like the technical aspects of what we do as audio engineers. And there are going to be those of you out there who are like, yeah, this is fascinating. There's all this technology. And then you're going to be talking to the dude who's been doing this for decades. And he's tired. He might not be tired of doing his job, but, you know, it's work. It is work. And like we were talking about this earlier, don't let that ruin your drive to learn and be engaged and pick up new things. It's hard. I find it more difficult, I think, than some of my coworkers and other people. They find it innately interesting. It's hard for me to like go to work and be the only one interested in this thing. That's difficult for me because I'm a very communal, energetic, like outgoing individual, and so it's difficult. And I definitely have been a gatekeeper in the past, and it's partially because of my own audio upbringing, as it were. And it's partially just the fact that I, you know, kind of let that take over in my life. So I guess my big thing to you guys out there who are struggling in live sound and struggling to like make it all work is don't Don't let those people dictate to you your interest in audio. Learn because you're interested and realize it is work, and that's okay. But you can still be interested in the technology and all that other stuff, and don't let gatekeepers like define how much enjoyment you get out of this technology, because it's a learning process for all of it. And I had another good friend of me tell one last thing. This is my last analogy, and we can end this thing. Everybody is on a different mountain, climbing a different slope. Just because somebody else is on Everest doesn't mean that the mountain you're climbing is now invalidated. You know, everyone's got their challenges. Everyone's working through their own things. And that applies to audio, that applies outside of that. And I think it's very good that we have a technology now where people can have access to it. I love that we have like the X32 system and the M32s and cheaper digital mixing boards that give you way more controls and power. I also think there's value in learning analog. So yeah, it's great. Audio is great. You're doing good. And just realize that you're going to mix good today, and tomorrow you're going to mix better.